The house was quiet except for the faint creak of the rafters and the hiss of wind slipping through the cracks in the shutters. She sat in the corner, knees drawn up, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. It had been weeks since her husband's death, yet his family had made no effort to console her. Instead, their eyes followed her with suspicion, as though her grief itself was a crime. They had never wanted her here, not really. When her husband first brought her home as a bride, there had been tight smiles and forced courtesies. The eldest sister-in-law had whispered to neighbors that she was too proud, too quiet, too different. The mother-in-law muttered about ill omens, about how women from her side of the valley brought misfortune. But her husband's laughter used to drown it all out. He would place a protective hand on hers at the table, as if to shield her from their barbs. Now he was gone, taken by fever after a sudden illness that swept through the village. And with him went her only shield. At first, they tolerated her silence. She ate little, spoke less, and kept mostly to herself. But as days stretched into weeks, their hostility sharpened. The sisters-in-law began to call her names when they passed her in the courtyard. They accused her of bringing death into the household, of poisoning their brother's life with her presence. By day, they forced her to scrub floors and fetch water until her hands cracked. By night, they whispered in their chamber, voices low and bitter, plotting what they might do with her. She felt the weight of their hatred press closer. Like storm clouds gathering. It came to a head on the night of the new moon. They woke her from sleep with rough hands, dragging her from her mat before she could even cry out. One of them clamped a hand over her mouth while the other two held her down. The smell of oil and iron filled her nose, and in the flickering light of a tallow lamp she saw it, the shears glinting. Her heart thudded in her chest. She struggled, twisting, but their grip was iron. Laughter bubbled from their throats. Not the laughter of joy, but the cruel, mocking laughter of those who delight in another's downfall. "Witch," one of them hissed, "you don't deserve a woman's crown." The cold bite of steel touched her scalp, and with a sharp, rasping sound, the first lock of her long dark hair fell. She kicked, she tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by their jeers. The shears bit again and again, until strands covered the floor like fallen leaves. Every snip was a humiliation, every lock a piece of her dignity stripped away. By the time they were finished, her scalp felt raw, exposed. The sisters-in-law stepped back to admire their work, sneering as though they had carved victory out of her shame. "Now everyone will see you for what you are," said the eldest, tossing the hair into the fire where it smoldered and curled. "A cursed woman, marked." They left her there, shorn and trembling, her head bare to the chill air. She touched her scalp with shaking fingers, hardly recognizing the stranger reflected in the basin of water by her side. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not weep aloud. She knew that would only fuel their cruelty. Morning light revealed the truth of her disgrace. When she walked through the courtyard, the servants looked away. Children pointed and whispered. An old neighbor crossed herself and spat on the ground, muttering a prayer against evil. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed, full of judgment and mockery. Her hair had been her pride, the one feature that set her apart. Now it was gone, and in its absence she felt not only stripped of beauty, but stripped of identity itself. What was left of her? A widow, unwanted, shamed, and marked for exile even before the words were spoken. That night, as she lay awake on her mat, she realized she could no longer stay. The house that had been her prison had turned into a gallows for her spirit. If she remained, they would break her completely. The desert, harsh and merciless, suddenly seemed a kinder fate, and so, in the silence before dawn, she wrapped herself in a thin blanket, tied a flask to her waist, and slipped into the darkness. Her shaved head prickled in the cold air, but her steps did not falter. She would rather face the emptiness of the wild than endure another day of their scorn. What she could not know, what none of them could imagine, was that humiliation was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The desert stretched out before her like a vast, endless sea of stone and sand. Each step she took away from the village felt both freeing and terrifying. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders flapped weakly in the night wind, offering little warmth. Her bare scalp stung in the chill, every brush of air reminding her of the shame carved into her by her in-laws' cruelty. At first, she walked quickly, almost running, as if the shadows of the house were chasing her. The adrenaline of escape carried her over dry gullies and ridges, her sandals scuffing on the hard ground. She wanted only distance from their laughter, their jeers, their accusing eyes. But distance soon became weight. The stars above were mercilessly clear, and the silence of the desert was so complete that it roared in her ears. Every rustle in the sagebrush became a threat, every shadow a prowling creature. She pressed on until dawn, her feet blistering, her throat aching with thirst. When the sun rose, the true cruelty of the desert revealed itself. The light was unrelenting, stripping away the comfort of night's shadows. The ground baked beneath her feet, and the horizon shimmered with mirages. She had only a small flask of water, and she rationed it carefully, one sip, then hours of parched silence. Yet by midday, her lips were cracked and her tongue felt heavy, swollen. She found a low canyon where a few mesquite trees cast patches of shade. There, she sank to the ground, clutching her knees and closing her eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on her bones, but sleep refused to come. Instead, memories surged. Her husband's smile when he first brought her to his family's home. His hand squeezing hers in reassurance. The fever that took him, leaving her alone in the world. Then came the sharper memory, the shears, the laughter, the fire consuming her hair. Her chest tightened. Shame was not just a memory. It was a weight that clung to her, a second skin. She imagined the villagers whispering even now, spreading stories of how she had been marked, how she carried a curse. Perhaps they were glad she had fled. Perhaps they would tell themselves that the desert had claimed her as it should. As the day dragged on, hunger gnawed at her. She had left in such haste that she carried no food. She chewed on mesquite pods, their bitterness coating her mouth, but they gave little strength. Her body ached. Her scalp burned beneath the sun despite her attempts to shield it with her blanket. By the second night, her strength was failing. She stumbled more than she walked, her vision blurring at the edges. A howl echoed in the distance coyotes, their voices rising like a cruel chorus. Fear twisted in her stomach, but she had no energy left for panic. She collapsed against a boulder, curling into herself, and wondered if this was where her story would end. Nameless. Forgotten, swallowed by the desert, her thoughts turned inward, strange and wandering in the haze of exhaustion. Perhaps her in-laws were right. Perhaps she was cursed. Why else would she be left alone in such a merciless world, stripped of family, of love, of dignity? Her hand trembled as she touched her bare scalp. She tried to imagine her hair growing back, but even that felt impossible, like asking the desert to bloom overnight. And yet, beneath the despair, a flicker of defiance stirred. It was faint, fragile, but real. She remembered the moment she had chosen to leave, the decision to step into the night rather than stay under their cruelty. That choice had been hers, not theirs. Even now, lying half-broken under the vast sky, the desert had not claimed her. Not yet, she whispered to herself, though her lips were cracked and her voice barely more than air. I am still here. The words were thin, but they steadied her. The night grew colder, and she drew the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Sleep finally came, fitful and shallow, filled with dreams of water and fire. In her dream, a figure on horseback emerged from the shadows of the canyon, watching her with unreadable eyes. She woke with a start, Unsure if it had been only a dream or something more, doubt her journey was not over. Though she could not know it, the desert had carried her to the edge of another story, one that would not be written in shame but in survival. And soon, someone else's footsteps would echo in the canyon, changing the course of her life forever. By the third day, she could no longer keep track of time. The desert blurred into one long, punishing trial, heat by day, cold by night, silence broken only by her ragged breathing. Her flask had run dry at dawn, and her cracked lips bled when she tried to lick them for moisture. Every step was an act of will, her body a shell staggering forward on stubbornness alone. She had followed the contours of a shallow ravine, hoping the rocks might lead her to a trickle of water. The canyon walls rose gradually, striped with red and ochre, their shadows offering relief from the punishing sun. She pressed her back to the stone, sliding down until she sat in the dirt. Her arms hung limp at her sides. The world tilted and spun. Her breath came shallow, as though the desert itself was pressing her lungs flat. Her eyes closed. The world faded. For a time, she hovered between waking and dream, the line so thin she could not tell which side she belonged to. In one moment she saw her husband's face, warm and alive. In another, she heard her sisters-in-law laughing, the shears rasping close to her scalp. Then silence again, deeper than sleep, and then hoofbeats. She thought at first she imagined them, the steady thud like a heartbeat against the earth. Her eyes fluttered open, gritty with dust. The sound grew louder, real this time, echoing down the canyon. A shadow stretched across the rocks, long and sharp. She forced herself to raise her head. A rider appeared at the bend of the canyon, framed against the fading light. He was mounted on a paint horse, its coat a patchwork of white and brown, its hooves scattering stones as it descended. The rider was tall and lean, his posture straight, his hair tied back with leather strips. An Apache warrior she had heard stories whispered in the village, tales of raids, of sudden attacks, of eyes that saw everything. Fear jolted through her like a spark. She tried to stand, to flee deeper into the canyon, but her legs betrayed her. They buckled, and she collapsed back onto the dirt. The warrior guided his horse closer, the animal's breath hot and heavy in the cooling air. For a moment, he did not speak. He studied her in silence, his dark eyes sharp, unreadable. She could feel the weight of his gaze, not pitying but assessing, as if he were deciding whether she was a threat, or perhaps something else. Her instinct was to shrink back, to hide her shorn head beneath her blanket. But shame had already stripped her of every defense. She met his eyes, her own burning with a mixture of fear and defiance. If this was to be her end, she would not beg. The warrior dismounted in one fluid motion, his moccasins barely stirring dust. He crouched in front of her, his shadow falling over her face. She caught the scent of leather and smoke on him, and something wilder beneath, like pine needles crushed beneath rain. "You should not be here," he said at last, his voice low and firm. His accent marked him as an outsider to her tongue, yet his words were clear. She swallowed, her throat too dry for an answer. Her lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes narrowed as he took in her cracked lips, her trembling hands, her bare scalp. "Your people did this," he said, though it was not a question. His gaze flicked to her head, then back to her eyes. There was no mockery in it, only recognition. Tears welled against her will. She looked away, unable to bear his steady stare. He reached out suddenly, his hand closing around her arm. She gasped at the unexpected strength in his grip. His touch was not cruel, but neither was it gentle. It was a claim, a declaration. "You're coming with me?" he said. The words landed like thunder in the hollow canyon. She stared at him, confusion and terror swirling in her chest. Why would he take her? Where? Was she his prisoner now, his spoil of chance? Or was it possible his words meant something else? Her heart pounded as she tried to pull back, but he held fast. The horse shifted its weight, snorting, as if impatient with her hesitation. She had no strength to resist, and yet she found herself whispering, hoarse and broken, "Why?" For the first time, his expression softened barely, but enough for her to see it. His gaze lingered not on her shorn scalp, nor her trembling form, but on her eyes. "Because the desert will take you," he said simply. "And you are not meant to die here." She could not argue. She could not even think. The canyon, the horse, the warrior all blurred together in the haze of exhaustion. When he pulled her to her feet, she did not resist. Her body leaned into his strength. Her will bound not by fear, but by the faint. Dangerous flicker of hope. And so, without fully understanding, she took the first step into a new world, one carved not by shame, but by survival. The warrior's hand remained firm on her arm as he guided her toward his horse. His grip was not cruel, but it carried an undeniable weight like the desert sun itself, impossible to escape. She stumbled once, her legs weak from thirst and fatigue, but he steadied her without slowing. When they reached the horse, he clicked his tongue softly, and the animal lowered its head, patient and watchful. With one swift motion, he swung himself into the saddle, then extended a hand to her. She hesitated, staring at his calloused palm, the dark lines etched into it by years of survival and battle. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I can't," she whispered, her voice so faint it almost vanished into the canyon air. His gaze fixed on her, sharp and unwavering. "You will," he said. Her knees buckled as she tried to resist. She thought of the stories told in the village, Apache raiders carrying off captives, women who vanished into the wild, never seen again. Was she now one of those stories? Would her name become a warning whispered to young brides by their mothers? "I won't go," she insisted, though her trembling voice betrayed her lack of conviction. He leaned down from the saddle, his shadow falling across her face. "Stay then," he said evenly. "Stay, and the sun will finish what your kin began. The coyotes will strip your bones before the moon is full." The words struck her like stones, not because of cruelty but because of truth. She had already felt the desert's hunger gnawing at her. Alone, she had no chance. Her eyes stung with tears she could no longer hold back. "Why do you care?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why not leave me here?" For the briefest moment, something flickered in his expression, something she could not name. Not pity, not softness, but a recognition deeper than words. He reached down again, his palm open, patient, but firm. "Because you are not meant to die this way," he said. His voice carried the same certainty as the earth beneath them, as if he were not offering her a choice but speaking a fact already decided. Her breath caught in her throat. The truth was, she had no strength left to argue. The fight had been beaten out of her by her in-laws, burned away by the desert sun, drained by hunger and thirst. She was a husk of herself, clinging only to the fragile thread of survival. And now, that thread was in his hands. With a shuddering sigh, she reached up. His hand closed around hers, strong and steady, and with a powerful tug, he lifted her into the saddle. She landed awkwardly behind him, her arms instinctively clutching at his waist to keep from falling. The horse shifted beneath them, muscles rippling, then began to move at his command. The canyon walls slid past as they rode, the rhythmic sound of hooves filling the silence. She rested her cheek against his back, too weak to hold herself upright. The scent of leather and smoke clung to him, grounding her, pulling her away from the edge of despair. Still, fear gnawed at her. Was she a captive now, stolen like the women in the old stories? Or was she something else? She did not know, and in her exhaustion, she could not untangle the knots of her thoughts. After some time, her voice cracked the silence. "Where are you taking me?" "To my people," he answered, without turning his head. "And what then?" she asked, though dread coiled in her stomach. "Then you will live." The simplicity of his words startled her. He did not say she would serve, or suffer, or be bound. Only that she would live. For a woman who had walked willingly into exile, believing death her only companion, those words were heavier than any chain. Night fell, and the desert cooled. Stars emerged one by one, sharp and unblinking, scattered across the sky. She closed her eyes, clinging to the rhythm of the horse's gait and the steady strength of the man before her. She was no longer running from her past, nor lying broken on the desert floor. She was carried forward, claimed not as a spoil, but as someone worth saving. And though fear still lingered, another feeling, something small and dangerous, began to stir inside her. Hope. The journey lasted through the night. She drifted in and out of a restless sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her. Each time she stirred, the warrior's presence reminded her she was no longer alone in the desert. His silence was unyielding, but it carried a strange comfort, like the hush of a storm held at bay. When the first blush of dawn painted the horizon, she lifted her head. Before them stretched a valley, greener than she expected after days of barren stone and sand. Cottonwoods clustered along a stream, their leaves glimmering silver in the morning light. Smoke curled upward from low fires hidden among the trees. The faint hum of voices drifted on the wind, children calling, women laughing, men speaking in tones that carried command and familiarity. Her body tensed. This was no mirage. This was a settlement. His people died as they approached. Figures began to emerge from the shadows of the trees. Children ran barefoot to see the horse and rider. Women carrying baskets of berries or bundles of firewood stopped in their work, eyes narrowing as they saw her slumped behind the warrior. Men with bows resting easily in their hands paused, their gazes sharp and assessing. She wanted to shrink into herself, to vanish beneath the blanket she clutched. Every stare pierced her like a blade. They would see her shorn scalp. They would know she was broken, abandoned by her own. And what would they think? That she was a burden, a curse? The warrior dismounted first, then turned to lift her down. His hands were steady as they closed around her waist, lowering her gently until her bare feet touched the earth. Her knees nearly gave way, but pride, thin and fragile though it was, kept her standing. A woman stepped forward from the gathering crowd. She was tall, her long hair streaked with silver, but still thick and strong. Her gaze swept over the newcomer with cool precision. She spoke quickly in Apache, her tone sharp but not hostile. The warrior replied in the same tongue, his words clipped, decisive. Though she could not understand, she recognized authority in his voice. The woman's eyes lingered on her, narrowed in thought. At last, the woman gave a single nod, then motioned for others to bring water and food. Hands offered her a clay cup filled with cool water. She drank greedily, the liquid spilling down her chin, soaking into her blanket. A basket of roasted corn was pressed into her arms. She ate until her stomach ached, unable to remember the last time she had felt full. Yet even as her hunger eased, unease coiled within her. The Apache camp was alive with movement, with voices rising and falling in a rhythm unfamiliar to her ears. Children played tag among the trees, their laughter sharp as birdsong. Men fletched arrows, polished their weapons, spoke of matters she could not follow. Women pounded corn with wooden pestles, their arms strong, their eyes quick. She felt herself an intruder in their world, marked, alien, fragile. Her shaved head burned under the gaze of strangers. Shame clawed at her, telling her she was still nothing, still the widow cast out and humiliated. But the warrior's people did not jeer. They did not spit or cross themselves. Their glances were wary, yes, but also curious. Some were even indifferent, returning quickly to their work. That night, The warrior led her to a small lodge near the edge of the camp. Its frame was made of bent poles covered in hides, smoke from a small fire drifting through a vent above. Inside, he motioned for her to sit. A blanket was spread for her, a space clearly prepared. "You are safe here," he said in a low voice. She looked at him, searching his face for mockery. She found none. His words were plain, heavy with certainty. As though he was stating a truth he would enforce with his very life, she wrapped the blanket tightly around herself. Lowering her eyes, safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue as the firelight flickered across the walls of the lodge. She touched her bare scalp, expecting the familiar sting of humiliation. But something shifted. The Apache had looked at her shaved head not as a mark of disgrace, but as a fact, neither ridiculed nor pitied. To them, it seemed, hair was only hair. Survival meant more. For the first time since her exile, she felt the faintest stirring of something deeper than fear, something that whispered she might, against all odds, belong somewhere again. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm unlike anything she had known before. At first, she was content merely to breathe, to wake in the mornings and not feel the lash of her in-laws' tongues, to fall asleep at night without fearing a cruel hand dragging her from her rest. But soon, the warrior pressed her to do more than simply exist. "You will not survive here if you sit still," he told her one morning, tossing a bundle of wood at her feet. "The desert will test you every day. You must learn to answer." And so she began. The first lessons were in gathering. He showed her how to tell which plants could be eaten and which carried poison. Together they dug for roots that held water, cracked cactus pads to drink their moisture, and stripped bark from certain trees to chew when thirst pressed hard. At first, she gagged on the bitter flavors, but hunger taught her to accept them. Then came the fire. He placed flint and steel in her hands and told her to coax sparks into flame. Her first attempts ended in frustration smoke that teased but refused to burn, sparks that died as quickly as they leapt. Her fingers blistered, her patience thinned. "Again," he said each time. His voice steadied. It was at night, beneath a sky drenched with stars, that she finally caught flame. The dry grass curled into orange, and heat bloomed against her face. A laugh broke from her chest, shaky, startled, but real. She had made fire, something her in-laws had never allowed her near, something they had said was not her place. The warrior watched her with unreadable eyes. But in the faint curl at the corner of his mouth, she saw acknowledgment, not of pity, but of respect. Days turned to weeks, and the training deepened. He placed her on his horse, teaching her to ride not as a passenger clinging for survival, but as one with the animal. She fell more than once, her pride bruised as much as her body, but she climbed back each time. She learned how to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath her, how to guide it with knees and hands, how to trust it. When her strength grew, he placed a bow in her hands. At first, she could not even string it. Her arms shook with the effort. But the warrior's patience was unyielding. Each day he had her draw, aim, release. The arrows often missed their mark, but when one finally struck the wooden post he had set for her, a surge of triumph flooded her veins. "Fire teaches patience," he told her one evening as they sat near the lodge's fire pit. "And the bow teaches focus. Without both, you cannot endure." Yet it was not only her body that hardened. Slowly, she found her spirit shifting too. The women of the camp began to accept her presence. They showed her how to grind corn, how to weave simple mats, how to gather herbs for medicine. Their words flowed in a language she still struggled to grasp, but their gestures were kind, their laughter warm. No one mocked her shorn head. Children even touched it curiously, giggling, then scampered away. What had been a mark of disgrace among her in-laws became something else here, a reminder of survival. Hair would grow again, but the will to endure, that was harder to reclaim. One night, As fire crackled low, the warrior spoke of scars. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal an old wound along his arm, a deep gash long healed but still jagged. This was from a Comanche spear, he said. It should have killed me, but it did not. Now it is only a scar. He looked at her shaved head, at the faint redness where hair once lay. This too will be a scar. Not your shame, your proof. Her throat tightened. She turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears she could not hold back. They were not the bitter tears of humiliation she had shed in her in-laws' house. They were something new tears that washed, that softened the hard places inside her. That night she lay awake in her blanket, listening to the soft crackle of fire and the distant howls of coyotes. For the first time in many months, she did not dream of her in-laws' cruelty. She dreamed instead of flames blooming beneath her own hands, of arrows flying true, of her shaved head sprouting hair like new grass after rain. Healing had begun not only in her body, but in her spirit. And though the road ahead would be long, she felt, for the first time, that she was walking it not as a broken widow, but as a woman being remade. Word reached her that her in-laws had declared her dead. A traveler from a nearby village brought the news while trading at the Apache camp. The widow who had fled into the desert had not survived. Her hairless head proof, she carried a curse that the earth itself had swallowed. She listened in silence as the warrior translated, his voice steady, his eyes fixed on her. Inside, something old and familiar stirred the ache of humiliation. But when she touched her scalp, now rough with new growth, she realized the sting had dulled. Her hair was returning, yes, but more importantly, so was her dignity. That night, she sat by the fire, staring into the flames until the warrior joined her. His gaze followed hers into the fire's heart. "You want to return," he said. It was not a question. She nodded slowly. "Not to stay, not to beg, to show them." Her voice trembled, but the words were steady, forged in the same fire that had taught her patience. "They must see that I am not what they said, that I am alive, stronger than when they cut me down." The warrior studied her a long moment, then inclined his head. "Then we will go." The journey back to the village was not the desperate stumbling exile it had been before. This time she rode with purpose. The horse carried her firmly, her back straight, her chin lifted. The warrior rode at her side, silent but vigilant. When they arrived, villagers stopped in their work to stare. The sight of her once a castaway now returned, her face darker from the sun, her arms lean with strength, her eyes steady, was enough to make whispers ripple through the crowd. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, pointing. Men frowned, unsettled. Women clutched their beads and crossed themselves. Her in-laws emerged from the house. The eldest sister-in-law froze at the sight of her, the basket in her hand slipping to the ground. The mother-in-law's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. "You," the eldest began, her voice sharp but faltering. "You were gone." "We said, you said I was dead," the widow interrupted, her voice ringing across the courtyard. She did not raise it in anger, but it carried nonetheless, honed by months of silence and survival. "You shaved me. You marked me. You told the village I was cursed." The crowd shifted uneasily. No one spoke, but all listened. Her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed, venom flickering back into her gaze. "And yet here you stand. What trickery is this? Who sheltered you?" The widow gestured to the warrior at her side. He sat tall on his horse, eyes unreadable, bow slung across his back. A ripple of unease swept through the villagers at the sight of him. "This man found me in the desert," she said, her voice steady. "Where you left me to die. You tried to strip me of dignity. But I am alive. I am more alive than I ever was under your roof." Her youngest sister-in-law spat on the ground. "Alive only because you cling to him. You shame yourself, returning with a savage." The widow's jaw tightened. Once, those words would have pierced her. Now they glanced off like arrows against stone. "You cannot shame me," she said, lifting her chin. "Not anymore. You tried, and you failed. Look at me." She threw back the blanket that covered her shoulders. The crowd saw the bow she carried at her back, the knife at her hip, the muscle carved by work and survival. No longer a ghost of a bride. No longer a widow crushed beneath grief. "Hair grows back," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the air like steel. "Spirit grows stronger. You thought you broke me. Instead, you forged me." The warrior's gaze swept over the gathered crowd, his silence a warning sharper than words. None dared to move. Her in-laws said nothing. Their faces twisted with disbelief, with anger, with fear. But the widow did not linger to savor their confusion. She had not come for vengeance. She had not come for forgiveness. She turned her back on them, her shoulders straight. "I am free," she said, more to herself than to them, and with that she mounted the horse again. The warrior nudged his own mount forward, and together they rode away, leaving the house, the whispers, and the years of cruelty behind. This time she did not walk into exile. She walked into freedom, carrying her scars not as shame, but as proof of survival. They rode for hours after leaving the village, the dust of its narrow streets fading into the horizon behind them. Neither spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic drum of hooves on the packed earth, the whisper of wind through mesquite branches, and the occasional cry of a hawk wheeling overhead. The widow sat tall in the saddle. Her hands no longer clutched at the warrior's waist for balance. They held the reins with confidence, guiding the horse as though it had always been hers. She did not look back. At last, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, the warrior drew his horse to a halt on a ridge overlooking the valley. From here, the world seemed vast and unclaimed, the desert stretching into forever. He turned his gaze toward her, his face solemn but softened by the fading light. "You have done what you came to do," he said. She nodded. "Yes." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I have no more ties there. No more chains." For a moment, silence lay between them. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, the cool promise of night. "What will you choose now?" he asked. The question lingered in the air. It was not spoken with expectation, nor with pressure. It was a gift, the freedom of choice, something she had been denied all her life. Her mind flickered with memories. The years in her husband's home, where her worth had been measured by obedience. The laughter of her in-laws as they stripped her of dignity. The long, punishing days in the desert when she believed death was her only companion. And then fire blooming beneath her hands, arrows finding their mark, children's laughter untainted by scorn, women's hands guiding hers in work that built rather than destroyed. She looked at the warrior. His scars spoke of survival, his silence of strength. Yet he had reached for her in her weakest moment, when the desert was ready to claim her and had declared, "You're coming with me." At the time, it had sounded like command. Now she understood it had also been salvation. "I will not go back," she said at last. "Not to them. Not to any who would call me cursed." She drew in a breath, her chest lifting as though her lungs had never been so full. "I choose life. I choose to walk forward, wherever that path leads." A small smile flickered across the warrior's lips, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, of agreement. Together they descended the ridge and returned to the Apache camp. The fires were already lit, glowing like stars scattered on the earth. Voices rose in laughter and song. The children saw them first, rushing out to meet the riders, their faces bright with curiosity and joy. As she dismounted, the women of the camp welcomed her with nods and quiet smiles. not as an outsider but as one who had endured. They pressed food into her hands, drew her to the fire's warmth, made space for her among them. For the first time in her memory, she did not feel like an intruder. She felt, if not yet fully belonging, then at least accepted. That night, as she sat by the fire with the warrior nearby, she touched her scalp, feeling the new stubble pushing through like young grass after rain. Once, that touch had brought only shame. Now it made her smile. She had been shaved, mocked, abandoned. She had walked through exile and despair. But she had not been broken. She had been remade. The warrior turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You walk a new path," he said. "Yes," she replied, her voice strong, her heart steady. "And I walk it freely." The flames danced higher, casting shadows that stretched into the night. Around her, the camp pulsed with life. Above her, the stars burned bright. And within her, a fire answered a fire that no one could ever again extinguish.